welcome to this special edition of India Today. I'm Nabila Jaman. For the next half hour, we're going to bring to you stories from across the globe about COVID-19 vaccine, the all-important vaccine, its testing, and how the virus can really be defeated. Early this week, reports of reinfection of COVID-19 have surfaced. In fact, 3 people who were infected with COVID earlier and recovered have now been reinfected. They've been found positive yet again with coronavirus. Here's our report.
In the last week of August 2020, a Hong Kong researcher's announcement shook the world when he announced that once infected by COVID, the patient might get infected again. The researcher found that repeated infection of COVID-19 may be a norm in the future after their team reported the first laboratory-documented reinfection.
The case that we reported is the first laboratory-documented reinfection of COVID-19. So the patient is a 33-year-old man who was initially diagnosed with COVID-19 in March, and it's a local case in Hong Kong. And then the patient subsequently in August, which is 4.5 months later on, when he returned to Hong Kong from Spain via London, he was diagnosed again to have a second infection of COVID-19.
Within days, 2 European patients confirmed that they have been reinfected with the novel coronavirus, one in Belgium and the other in the Netherlands. This shattered the earlier held belief that once someone recovered from COVID, that person did not have to worry about the virus anymore. Now this has raised questions about how long immunity lasts after a COVID infection.
The Belgian case was a woman in her 50s, and the second week of March she had a first infection. Typical COVID infection, not bad enough to go to the hospital, but she was really ill. And the second case was exactly 3 months later with exactly the same symptoms, but then of a shorter duration, it was only 1 week.
Dat is iemand met een duidelijk verminderd immuniteit, dus daarom hebben wij daar ook niet zo'n rugbaarheid aan gegeven, omdat we dat verklaarbaar vonden. Kijk, de grotere vraag en de zorg van mensen, die snap ik ook wel, is natuurlijk van, maar is dit nu standaard? Hè? Nou, ik denk dat niet. Moet je natuurlijk altijd mee uitkijken, maar er zijn diverse onderzoeken die hebben laten zien dat het overgrote merendeel van de mensen die die infectie doormaakt echt een goede immuunrespons laten zien.
These cases have also fueled fears about the effectiveness of potential vaccines against the virus.
From other studies we know that the mutation rate of coronaviruses is less than of the influenza virus, but it's there. I mean, that's what they do every day. Viruses mutate, and that means that a potential vaccine is not going to be a vaccine that will last forever or even for 10 years, probably not even 5 years. Just as for flu, this will have to be redesigned quite regularly.
For the moment, experts believe there would need to be many more cases of reinfection for these fears to be justified.
It will be difficult for COVID-19 to entirely disappear or go away. But there will be a stage after a few more years that herd immunity will be able to reach. Because if you have like 60-70% of the population either had recovered from a natural infection or that they have received the vaccine, then they will generate enough herd immunity to protect the population.
Our consulting editor Rajdeep Sardesai spoke with Dr Kelvin Kai-Wang To of Hong Kong University. Let's take a listen to what the clinical associate professor of Lee Ka-shing Facility of Medicine had to say about reinfection possibilities and its implications on vaccine hunt for COVID.
And joining us now is a very special guest. I'm joined by Dr. Kelvin Kai-Wang To. He joins us from the University of Hong Kong. Appreciate your joining us, sir. Your research, doctor, on the first documented instance of human coronavirus reinfection has sparked off fears that there could be many such cases across the world. This is the tip of the iceberg. Do you share those fears that coronavirus reinfection could be far more widespread than we imagined?
So thank you for your question. First of all, I don't think reinfection should cause a panic in the public. I believe that we found the first case of reinfection, and I believe there is probably more reinfections out in other places. But for example, in our case, the patient did not have any symptoms at all during the second infection. So one possibility is that patients who have the second infection may be milder than the first one. And so I think for the general public, we should not be panicking about this reinfection. But the importance of our finding is that we have to realize that patients who have recovered from COVID should not be thinking that they will never get infected again. So I think there's the first point. And second, so they should still practice social distancing measures and wear masks in order not to transmit viruses to others. So I think this is the point.
So what you're saying, doctor, is that the patient who contracted a different coronavirus from what strain from what he contracted the first time, that this was a different strain and this time he was asymptomatic. So you're saying that I may recover from coronavirus, I will get immunity against a particular type of coronavirus strain, but that does not prevent me from getting coronavirus from a different strain. Are we saying that this was a very different strain which this person got 4 months later?
So this patient actually have COVID, the particular coronavirus that causes the COVID pandemic, in both episodes. So what is different is that the virus belongs to, so the second COVID is in a different lineage from the first COVID. So this is the problem with this patient. So this is different from having other coronaviruses because, there are many coronaviruses circulating among humans in addition to COVID. So for example, if you have COVID before, you may have other coronavirus infection too. But for this particular patient, the patient had 2 episodes of COVID.
The question, of course, is what happens to immunity then? What happens to vaccines then? If I tomorrow take when we get a COVID-19 vaccine, I take the vaccination, can I still get COVID a few months later? Is the fear that people have because there may be, I may not be fully immunized. Is that a fear?
So first, we have to know that the immunity from vaccine is very different from natural infection. So in the recent vaccine studies, the antibody titer and the cell immunity is actually very good, even after a few months. So we are not certain yet, but probably vaccine can induce a better protection than natural immunity. But at the moment, we don't know how good our vaccine is protecting us from getting infection. The results should be out in a few months with all the phase 3 clinical trials. So that's the first point. And secondly, we don't know the duration of immunity after vaccine. And these data will be coming out in the near future. So because right now, even the earliest vaccines that have undergone trial is only a few months. So we don't have long-term data yet. So for vaccine studies, long-term data is very important.
The reason I'm asking you this is there is this talk of the long tail of coronavirus, that after getting coronavirus, a few months later, some symptoms may recur or I may get it may have some impact on other body functions. Do you believe that is a concern, that even after recovering from coronavirus, I could still have some lingering symptoms which will emerge 3 or 4 months later? Is that a real fear, doctor, or not?
That is usually not the case. So, for example, for this particular patient, I mean, for most patients, after recovery, they won't have long-term symptoms. And I've never heard anybody having recurrent symptoms due to the first infection. So I don't think this is, I mean, it's very unlikely that somebody will get symptoms months after the first infection. So if a person gets, of course, if a person gets reinfected by another new coronavirus, a new strain or new lineage, they can develop symptoms again. But at the moment, we only seen one case, so we don't know how severe the second reinfection can be in other patients.
So are we saying based on this one case, it would be difficult to make any inferences for the future? That at the moment, this should be treated as an isolated case which you've documented. Based on this, we cannot make any broad generalizations about patients getting reinfected. Am I correct?
You are correct.
So what is it then, therefore, that you would advise at this moment to patients who have recovered from coronavirus? Is there anything you would specifically tell them? Should they go and get themselves tested a month or two later again? Suppose I've been I test corona positive, I go through the treatment, I test negative. Should I 1 or 2 months later again go and get myself tested?
There's no need for routine testing after the first infection. But of course, if you have recovered from COVID-19, a few months later, you have developed symptoms again, you should go and see a doctor and get tested because you may have a second infection. So, and secondly, it is very important that even if you have COVID-19 infection, it is probably still worth for you to get vaccinated too in the future because, as I said, vaccination can induce a much stronger immunity than natural infection. And to get a vaccine will prevent you, hopefully can prevent you from getting further infections.
So what you're saying is that a vaccination is much better than natural immunity. Where does this leave the whole concept of herd immunity? You know, a lot of epidemiologists are talking that eventually herd immunity is the only way out. If there is the threat of reinfection, what happens to herd immunity?
So the best way to get herd immunity is probably having vaccination. So as this case illustrates, natural infection, sometimes the immunity can be not very long lasting. But with the data so far, the immunity from vaccines seems to be much better. So I think to achieve herd immunity, we should not rely on natural infection, but rather we should rely on vaccination.
Okay, Doctor, what you're saying has cleared a lot of the doubts that we've had at the moment after your research. Thank you very much for joining me there from Hong Kong. Thank you, Dr. Kelvin To.
The key to defeat COVID-19 at this point, of course, lies in early detection through aggressive testing. India hopes to reach a test per day soon enough. The world is trying to find simpler and faster ways and testing mechanisms. And in this process, on the 27th of August, the US Food and Drug Administration gave an emergency use authorization to Abbott Laboratories for a 15-minute test that should ease bottlenecks. In fact, here's a report on how the testing kits in the future could be simpler paper test kits.
India is now running about 800,000 tests a day, according to the Health Ministry briefing on Wednesday, 26th of August. The government says that the target is to reach 1 million tests per day as soon as possible.
On 25th August, we have done 3 crore 68 lakh tests, and we have 1,524 laboratories with having done about 1 crore tests on 7th of July, 2 crore on 3rd of August, and 3 crore on 17th of August.
But it is also a fact that no country knows the total number of people infected with COVID-19. The serosurveys in various Indian cities seem to suggest that more people are infected than is being tabulated through the tests. The challenge has always been on how to increase testing. Since mid-June, India began to use cheaper and faster but less accurate tests to scale up testing. The faster tests are the ones that screen for antigens or viral proteins, in contrast to the RT-PCR or reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction tests that looks for sections of the virus's genes.
India's testing capacity increased after the introduction of the rapid antigen test kits. Till date, ICMR data reveals that more than 3.9 crore samples have been tested. But how many were tested through RT-PCR, which is known as the gold standard of testing, and how many were tested through rapid antigen tests is still being collated by the government.
In an RT-PCR test, a swab from the nose or throat has to be sent to a lab. There, when a molecular probe finds even a tiny amount of viral RNA, it makes a DNA copy of it. A machine then produces millions of copies of this DNA and adds fluorescent tags, making it detectable by the device. The RT-PCR test results are very reliable because of this amplification step, which means even trace amounts of the virus's RNA gets detected. The antigen tests, on the other hand, are paper-based tests, somewhat like a home pregnancy test. A paper test is based on how liquid moves through paper, known as lateral flow. Parts of a paper strip are coated with antibodies, tagged with a specific dye, which can detect specific proteins. A liquid added to the sample is put at one end of the paper, and it flows laterally through capillary motion towards the other end, crossing the area coated with antibodies. If there are viral proteins, they attach to the antibodies, and when the liquid encounters the test line, the dye is released, and the test turns positive. If the dye is not released, the line won't show, and the test is negative. When the liquid flows further to the control line, a color change takes place, showing that the test was correct. While the coronavirus rapid tests are simpler, they have still not reached the state where they can be done at home like the home pregnancy kit. But researchers around the world are hard at work to quickly come up with paper tests that a user can do on one's own. This, in all probability, be saliva-based. A study published in the Indian Journal of Medical Research pointed to gargled water samples being a viable alternative.
This is another problem with this kit. That is the sampling collection method. When we collect the sample, the swab has to go deep into the nose, and you take the sample over the well. And it is a cumbersome procedure. Though there will be less risk of aerosolization, but it may be possible the person who is collecting the sample may not collect it properly. And as I told you, the sensitivity of kit is pretty poor. It will go further down.
It can be done at the home of the patient, but by a person who has expertise in collection of a nasopharyngeal swab and doing the test and taking the reading. Because based on this reading, the report will be generated by the laboratory concerned, and it has to be updated and uploaded on the ICMR portal as well.
The paper test technology is already half a century old, having been around since the early 1970s. And now, prestigious research labs around the world to big medical tech companies are looking at ways on how to create coronavirus paper tests, either antigen or RNA-based, that can become home fixtures like the pregnancy test.
Now, the last time the world was hit by a pandemic of similar nature was nearly a century ago in 1918. It took about 2 years before H1N1 was defeated. This time around, the World Health Organization hopes that in less than 2 years, COVID-19 can be contained. Here's a report on how.
A 100 years ago, there had been a pandemic, a flu that had ravaged the world. It affected nearly 1 in every 3 people in the world. 500 million people were infected and 50 million died. In India, the toll was estimated to be 12 to 13 million. There was no vaccine and the first antibiotic was 10 years in the future. So the flu pandemic that began in 1918 carried on till 1920 before it subsided. With limited connectivity compared to 2020, isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants and limitations of public gatherings helped control the pandemic to the extent possible till finally that virus had been defeated.
Of course, with more connectedness, the virus has better chance of spreading. It can move fast because we are more connected now. But at the same time, we have also the technology to stop it and the knowledge to stop it. So we have a disadvantage of globalization, closeness, connectedness.
Lockdowns, quarantine, masks, PPE kits, sanitizers and social distancing became part of daily lives and vocabulary across the world. And with that too was the inevitable question, where's the vaccine that can stop this virus? And so began the race for a vaccine, a weapon to fight the deadly virus to end the pandemic at the earliest, and to also reap the commercial benefit that the first successful vaccine would deliver.
So we hope to finish this pandemic before less than 2 years, especially if we can pull our efforts together and with national unity, global solidarity, that's really key, with utilizing the available tools to the maximum and hoping that we can have additional tools like vaccine. I think we can finish it in a shorter time than the 1918 flu.
While it is understood that the vaccine would come from one of the more developed countries, what about its equitable and affordable distribution across the world? To address this legitimate concern of the global south, WHO initiated the COVAX facility, a 172-country grouping that would participate in the fair distribution of the vaccine as per the need of humanity, rather than the concern for commerce and profit.
Last week, I sent a letter to all member states requesting them to join the vaccine arm of the ACT Accelerator. I'm pleased to announce that as of today, 172 countries are now engaging with the COVAX Global Vaccines Facility, which has both the largest and most diverse COVID-19 vaccine portfolio in the world. At present, there are 9 vaccines that are part of this dynamic portfolio, which is constantly being reviewed and optimized to ensure access to the best possible range of products. Even now, discussions are ongoing with 4 more producers, and a further 9 vaccines are currently under evaluation for the longer term.
COVAX currently has 9 candidate COVID-19 vaccines, and the aim of the initiative is to deliver 2 billion vaccine doses across the countries that sign up. The deadline for joining is 31st of August 2020.
That's all that we have for this special edition of Vaccine Testing COVID. News and updates continue on the other side of a short break. Keep watching India Today.